Hi everyone, for this tutorial we're going to be learning how to do an all-in-one facing. So for your notebook you're going to need 4 pieces. You'll have your front bodice, your back bodice, your front facing and your back facing, and your front and back facing pieces should be fused. So to start off with this, we're going to sew your shoulder seams together. So I've got my back piece here. I'm going to match with my fabric touching right side to right side. I'm matching up my shoulder seams, and I'm going to sew these up top at 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm also going to do the same thing for my facing pieces. So with right side of fabric touching right side, you're going to sew these shoulder seams at 1/2 inch seam allowance as well. Okay, I've sewn both of my shoulder seams together on my bodice and also both shoulder seams on my facing pieces. Again, both of these are at 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're also going to go to your iron and press your seam allowance towards the back of the body. Your back is the piece that has the double notches at the center of the neckline. So both seam allowances press towards the back of the body. So once you've done this, you're ready to attach your facing piece to your bodice piece at the neckline. So when your piece is finished, what we want it to look like is this facing will be the right side of the fabric of the facing will be showing on the wrong side of the bodice piece. So this is what we're after. So we're going to start to attach this at the neckline. So we're going to have right side touch right side. So what you'll do is you're just going to take your facing piece and find your front notch. So here's my front, and then here's my front notch of my bodice. I'm going to take my facing piece and I'm going to tuck it inside of my bodice, and I'm going to line up this neckline and just pin around it. So I'm starting with my front notch. I'll pin those together. Again, right side of fabric. So here's my neckline, just so you can see. Right side of fabric is touching right side of fabric. So I've got my front notch pinned. Now I'm going over to my shoulder seam. I'm going to pin those together. And then my back double notches, I will pin those together. And then my other shoulder seam, I am pinning that together. Make sure your shoulder seams are pressed towards the back of the body. Okay, so now I've got all of my neckline pinned up. Now I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the neckline. Okay, I'm back and I have stitched at 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around my neckline. After you've stitched around your neckline, you want to understitch this. So I'm going to find my facing piece. So here's my seam where it's attached, and I want my seam allowance to be pressed towards my facing piece. And I want to put this under my machine and I want to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line towards my facing piece so that I'm tacking down this seam allowance on the bottom. So I'm going to go and do that. Okay, I'm back and I have understitched around my neckline. And then also I've gone to my iron and I've just pressed that under so that my neckline is just nice and clean. Okay, after you've understitched your neckline, the next step is to attach your facing at your armhole seam. So to do this, we need to make sure that our side seams are not connected yet. So just leave this open. I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to lay it out like this. And I want to attach this whole facing edge to the armhole right here. But I want this to be a clean edge. So to do that, to connect it properly, take your facing and pull it away like this. Now we're going to take this edge of your bodice armhole and this edge of your facing armhole. I'm going to take them, these are the shoulder seams right here, so hold it like this. You're going to tuck all this other stuff under and then connect with right side touching right side. So I'm going to show you that again. So just hold it out, lay it out like this. I'm going to take so these are my shoulder seams. I'm going to hold my facing shoulder seam and then hold my bodice shoulder seam. Spread it apart like this. Take all this other fabric, tuck it under. I'm still holding these, and then I'm going to match up my shoulder seams right side touching right side. Right side touching right side. So once I've found that, I can start to pin along this edge. And I'm going to pin all the way along this armhole edge. Okay. Once that is all pinned together, you're going to sew all along this edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, I have sewn all along that edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I want to do the same thing I did for the neckline, and I want to do an understitch. So I'm going to fold my seam allowance towards the facing piece, and I'm going to stitch that down at 1/8 of an inch away from this seam line. So again, that 1/8 of an inch stitch is towards the facing piece, and your seam allowance should be pressed towards your facing piece. Now you might not be able to get through this whole, see, this is kind of like a tunnel. So you're just going to start from this edge and stitch as far in as you can. And then if you can't get any further, you're going to go from the other edge and stitch towards this shoulder seam as far as you can. Okay, I have understitched all along that seam. So again, you're going to have to go from one way and get as far in as you can, and then if you can't get your needle through this little tunnel, then start from the opposite end. So once that is done, you want to press this in. I know this looks very messy. Just find that armhole seam. Turn this right side out. There we go. Okay, so here's that armhole seam where I understitched, and I'm just going to go to my iron and press this so that that seam is a little cleaner. Okay, I've pressed that, and so this armhole is done. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for this other armhole. So again, you're just gonna lay it out like this. You're going to hold your facing piece. Here's my facing piece. I'm gonna find this shoulder seam. I'm gonna hold that with one hand, and then I'm going to separate it away from the bodice armhole. And then I'm just going to tuck all of this underneath, and I'm going to match up those shoulder seams to where the bulk of all my other stuff is just all in between. But I'm matching up right side with right side and matching up at those shoulder seams, and then from there pin along the edge of this. Okay, now that I've got that done, I'm going to do the exact same 2 steps I did for the other armhole. I'm going to sew this at 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then after I've sewn that, I'm going to go back and understitch at 1/8 of an inch away from that seam with my seam allowance pressed towards my facing. I'll understitch all the way around that edge at 1/8 of an inch. Okay, my armholes have been pressed, and final step is to attach the side seams together. So I'm gonna lay it folded like that. And so for your side seams, you're going to fold out your facing pieces. So on this side, my front and my back, I'm going to fold those out. And now I'm going to attach all of this together like this, and sew down at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I would put a pin through the seam where the facing is attached to the bodice. I'd put a pin right there so that your seams are matching up, and you're going to stitch down at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to do this on both sides. Okay, I have stitched those shut on both sides, so 1/2 inch seam allowance. My final step is I'm going to go over to my iron, and I'm going to press this seam open, and then after I press it open, I'm going to press this facing down and just kind of press around this armhole a little more. Okay, and that is your finished all-in-one facing. So when you turn it right side out, you've got no raw edges showing, and your neckline and your sleeves, or sorry, your neckline and your armholes are completely encased.